Today we're going to cover the drywall count condition properties. Now this is most commonly used in the format of a column, so that's what we're going to be using as the condition to show you today. So starting in the upper left, you have your condition description. Simply just type in the name of the condition in which you would like to have this populated as. Moving to the right, you have additional information here, lineal footage of framing and framing height. This is again just the C quantities and tilde codes that we can use for descriptions while you're looking at labor lines and that type of information. Moving down, you get into your C fields. Now again, these are user definable fields that you can go in and customize. We can use this information to pull into descriptions or to pull into formulas, but again, it's just your user definable fields. Moving down, you're going to get into your stud information. Now you'll notice that we provide 8 fields for your stud, so if you didn't want to type in the number 8 here, but you wanted to have 8 individual studs being calculated, you could go ahead and do that. For simplicity's sake, we just said 8 studs, and they're going to be 25 gauge metal. They're going to be 3 5/8 width. The length is 10 foot, and they're going to be cut from. Here in the type, this is where I would apply either my SSMA code, my nomenclatures, or the flange style that we're going to be using for those studs. If you were going to be using different gauge studs, you could go ahead and turn on a different stud option, preemptively fill this out for different stud options, metal-wise, width-wise, or length-wise, that you could just simply toggle on or toggle off later on in the future, just depending on what the job called for. In this case, we're just going to leave those 8 25 gauge studs, and we're going to continue down. Moving down, the next field that you have is your track. Now in this case, you'll notice we're only using one track field, and that's because we're going to be utilizing the same track at both the bottom and the top of the column. In this case, because we're calculating a 2x2 column, that's why we need 8 studs, and that's also why we're calculating 1.6 runs of track. Now this is going to come in as 1.6 because we're ordering a 10-foot stud. So if you take 8 feet, right, 2x2x2x2 for your 2x2 column, and you do that top and bottom, that's where we're coming up with the 1.6. Reason being is you have a 10-foot stud, and we need in total 16 lineal foot of track. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and just put 2 here to cover yourself, but you're going to round on the pricing screen as well. So that's why we show 1.6. Gauge is referring to the gauge of metal. Width is the width of metal for the track. Length is the length of the track that you're going to be ordering. And then again, type is your nomenclature, your SSMA code, or the flange style that you're going to be using. If you were going to be using 2 different flanges for your track, simply turn on track number 2 and populate this 1 run of each, and you should be good to go on your project. The next tab that we're going to cover with you is the insulation tab. When you click on insulation, you'll notice that you're provided with 3 different insulation fields. Now you do have an insulation height here of 10 feet. You are going to want to fill that out, so that way we can help you get the correct description for your labor line if you're using it. If you don't want to fill that out, it's okay. In this case, we're going to continue on with the insulation. As mentioned about this insulation height, we do want to go ahead and fill that out because it is going to be applied to your description. If you've modified your labor description, you don't have to fill that out. But if you haven't, by default, that's something we provide in every labor line for our users. Continuing down to bats. So now here we're asking the square footage of bats that you're putting in. So in this case, we just know that it's 10 feet tall and that there's 8 lineal footage. So you do the math, we get 80 square foot, and we throw that number in. What's the thickness of insulation that you're going to be running? How often are your studs going to be spaced, in this case, on your column? And then what type of insulation are you going to be using? So again, the width here is, we're doing 24-inch spacing, so we're going to be ordering that 24-inch wide sheet of ISO. Next thing that you have is your rigid insulation. So with the rigid insulation, it's asking you for the number of pieces that you're going to need. So you do have to do a little math here, calculating your square footage out based on the square footage you need for your project. Continuing down, you have the thickness of the rigid insulation you're going to be producing. We are also asking for the width and the length of the board that you're going to be ordering. Continue down, and now you're going to simply choose the type of rigid board that you're going to be producing on this project. Moving to the right, you have safing. Here for safing, we're asking for the total lineal footage that you're going to need for where this column is going to touch the deck for your fire safing insulation. We also are going to ask for the thickness that you're going to need to provide. We will require the width and the length as well. The gap height is going to be the distance from the top of the flute to the top of your track. Type is going to be the type of insulation that you're using specifically. And then if you wanted to apply a multiplier based on the flutes, you could. Most of the time, this is going to be just the number 1 if you were calculating safing information here. The next tab that we're going to cover with you is your bracing tab. In the bracing tab, what we're going to be calculating is additional bracing studs and or bracing track. And if you needed to run any channel through this column, we'd also be calculating that information here. Now you're going to fill this information out as follows. Number is number of studs and or number of pieces of track that you're going to provide for every count that you click on the takeoff screen. Gauge is the gauge of metal. Width is the width of the metal that you're producing. Length is the length of metal you're producing. Cut from for your studs is if you're going to be ordering a larger stud and cutting those down. Type is going to be the SSMA code or the flange style that you're working with or the nomenclatures. And then for your bracing, ultimately bracing is going to be very similar. Here in this case with channel, it's the number of runs of channel and the height of that column. What is the gauge that you're working with? What is the width and the length of that? And then ultimately, what's the type of channel you're using as well. Now that's going to wrap us up for this portion of the drywall count condition properties. If you have any other additional questions, feel free to reach out to our tech team and we'd be happy to assist you in those questions and point you in the right direction. Thank you very much for watching and have a great day.